So I'd like to thank everybody for coming this afternoon. My name is John Danahy. I'm the chairman of the board for the town of Scituate, the Board of Selectmen. This is our 4th year for the commemoration of the Easter Uprising of 1916. We've been very fortunate with the weather holding off, and even though it may look a little dark over the southerly here, we'll get this going. First and foremost, I just want to thank all of you for coming. Each and every year, this is a commemoration signifying a really significant event, not just in the history of Ireland, but also for the world in general. I find that, we can go back to our revolution in 1776, and we have the Declaration of Independence. 1916 proclamation was the Declaration of Independence for Ireland. The significance isn't necessarily the act of it itself. It's really the intrinsic value of all those people who really went forward to try to preserve dignity, the humanity of themselves and the people, and the respect. And I notice in this day and age, that is severely being attacked across the world. A commemoration such as this is something, while maybe a historical reminder, it's more importantly to remember that these people didn't die in vain. Rather, they actually died with the hope that you would carry on, not their memory, but what they truly believed in, just like many patriots here in the United States have done. So I just want to say thank you for coming out and commemorating this. I'd like to thank in particular all our guest speakers, John Travers, who's the president of the Hibernian division of Father Murphy from Plymouth, the state president of the Hibernians, Paul Hogan, who traveled from my father's hometown or city of Holyoke, which I'm very honored to have. Also, the Consul General, Fionnuala Quinlan, from the embassy here in Boston, from Ireland. Unfortunately, she's going to be leaving to warmer weather in 3 weeks, but I'm very proud and thank you very much for coming. In addition, I'd like to thank Senator Patrick O'Connor, who's here with us. And Patrick, thank you for doing this. It's not easy to take a day out of your Sunday to come down here, as well as our Representative Patrick Kearney, who's with us here, doing the same thing along with our other representative, Joe Moschino, for coming down. Also, thank Dr. Catherine Shannon. She's going to be giving our speech. Bobby Mullis, who does the singing of the Irish National Anthem. If you know Gaelic, please join in on it. You all know the United States National Anthem, so we're going to be relying on all of you to also sing it. And I also want to thank the bagpiper, Paul Boyle, in the back. He's always been doing this, and we thank you very much. I want to make sure we give recognition to them. Finally, the only other thing I just want to point out is this. The one person who has been very instrumental in ensuring that this is done for the past 4 years and going forward is none other than John Sullivan. I can't think of another person who should be doing this, but also who really cares about this, not just for the sake of the commemoration, but also for the town of Scituate. And as a Scituate resident, I just want to say to John, thank you very much. It's not often that you get recognized when you do certain things, but at this point in time, I just want to say thank you very much for doing it and continuing to do it. That being said, I'd like to turn it over to John Travers, President of the Ancient Order of Hibernians with the Father John Murphy Division. John.
Thank you, John. It's nice to see you again. Nice to see everybody here. It's a great turnout. It seems to be growing every year. I'd like to thank Siobhan Hunter for her help with the program, and Mike Schilling. Mike, raise your hand. Mike put together the program that you have in your hands today. Did a fantastic job. And also my good friend John Sullivan, as John Danahy said, John Sullivan is a key member of the Hibernians in Plymouth, and he's the driving force behind this commemoration every year. Also, Paul Hogan, where's Paul? Paul Hogan has been the state president for the last 4 years, and unfortunately they have term limits. And Paul is going to be leaving us at the end of next week when we have our state convention in Falmouth, and we'll be electing a new president. I want to personally thank Paul for what he's done for me personally, as well as the divisions across the state. Thanks, Paul. Okay, in 1916, in the weeks and days after the rising, there were many letters written between family members and the patriots who fought in Dublin during the rising. And I'd like to read to you, it's a very poignant letter, and listen to the words very carefully. Thank you. My object in agreeing to an unconditional surrender was to prevent the further slaughter of the civilian population of Dublin and to save the lives of our gallant fathers who, having made for 6 days a stand unparalleled in military history, we are now surrounded, and in the case of those under the immediate command of headquarters, without food. I fully understand now, as then, that my own life is forfeit to British law, and I shall die very cheerfully if I think that the British government, as it has already shown itself strong, will now show itself magnanimous enough to accept my single life in forfeiture and give general amnesty to the brave men and boys who fought at my bidding. When I was a child of 10, I went down on my bare knees by my bedside one night and promised God that I should devote my life to an effort to free my country. I have kept that promise. We went into the fight. I am glad we did. We seem to have lost. We have not lost. To refuse to fight would have been to lose. To fight is to win. We have kept faith with the past and handed on a tradition to the future. I assume I am speaking to Englishmen who value their freedom and who profess to be fighting for freedom of Belgium and Serbia. Believe that we, too, love freedom and desire it. To us, it is more desirable than anything in the world. If you strike us down now, we shall rise again and renew the fight. You cannot conquer Ireland. You cannot extinguish the Irish passion for freedom. If our deed has not been sufficient to win freedom, then our children will win it by a better deed. This was written by Padraig Pearse from his cell in Kilmainham Jail in Dublin, probably between midnight May 2nd and prior to his execution by firing squad early on the morning of May 3rd, 1916. Thank you. I give you Paul Hogan, State President.
Well, I'd like to welcome all of you for coming out today. And John said the crowd seems to be bigger, and it is bigger than when I was down here last year. Father John Murphy Division. I love it to death. I enjoy coming down, and I always tell these guys, they thank me for coming all the way from the Great Golden West, but which is still part of Massachusetts, by the way. It doesn't end at 495 like everyone thinks, but I want to thank them for the invitation, and he's too kind for the words he said about me. I have more of a blister on the backside of most of the divisions, trying to get them in line. But down here, it's great. They do a great job. And I want to thank them for inviting me back for the second year, which I never thought I would after the speech I gave last year. But I wanted to thank them for the invite. And it's turning out to be a great tradition down here. And that's what this is all about, is remembering the sacrifices of our forefathers and passing it on to the younger generation so it doesn't get lost in history, which a lot of things do. And I know the British would love to bury it. But the rising came to be leading back to the Great Hunger and Gormore, which I like to call the British genocide of Ireland. This is the Irish of 1840-1845. Over 1 million died of death, disease, and starvation. It used to be a joke with the British. They would say, oh, there's another green mouth laying on the side of the road. That's because they were forced to eat grass, or they had nothing to eat. And women, children, and the men, and then the British soldiers would laugh at them. And the reason why I call it genocide is because there was enough food in Ireland. The British awarded their land to their cronies, I like to say, and the people that had owned it for over thousands of years were forced to be sharecroppers and turn their crops over to them, to the landlords, and they'd send it out of Britain. So you can see the hostility the Irish had. And it was passed on for a couple of generations. Hence the Easter Rising in 1916. And what it does is the Rising was doomed from the start, sorry to say. Even Frederick Pierce admitted that, and for the life of me, I couldn't find the little quote that he had. But what it was, from what I can remember of the quote, he said, from the start, this was doomed to failure. A lot of the Irish were not in back of them for doing it. They wanted to just let everything lay and just go on with their meager existence. But the 12 signers of the proclamation had other ideas. They went forward with it. On Easter Monday is when it all started. To take over the GPO, the barracks, and I was there 2 years ago this past March. And it was quite the feat after walking around and seeing what they did accomplish. But as I said, Frederick Pierce said it was doomed from the start, and it was. They didn't have the backing they should have, not like they would get in this country. But as it may, one of the main reasons the Rising was doomed is out of all the leaders, there was only one or two with military experience. Most of them were teachers, poets, run-of-the-mill people like we are today. And they only had 1,000 or so to take on the British. Well, the British only had, in the Dublin garrison, 1,000 troops. And this is Monday. By Wednesday, they had 44,000 troops that came across the channel. Needless to say, that's why they were overtaken and they wound up surrendering. And this is my sole take on the Easter Rising. And it woke up the people, not because of its failure, but because of how the British executed all the leaders of the Rising. And it just stirred bad feelings with the Irish against the British. To this day, my belief, from delving into Irish history for most of my life, is if it wasn't for the Easter Rising, there never would have been an Irish Revolution from 1919 to 1922. And it was then they gained some independence from Britain, although it divided the North. The British kept the North, as we all know. But with all of their atrocities, the British, over the years, as you can tell, I'm no fan of Britain. In modern history, we had the Great Hunger, which the ancient or Hibernians call it Angora Moor. Is the Gaelic for that. And it is not a famine. It was a British genocide. And the leaders of Britain, to this day, won't admit the atrocities, whether it was in the potato famine, which they like to say, or if it was in 1916. There was over 1,000 Irish killed that day on the Rising. Most of them were men, women, and children that just came out to see the goings-on. That Wednesday, with the cannons, the machine guns, the British didn't care. They just mowed anything that moved down. They won't admit to their wrongdoing on that. They won't admit to their wrongdoing of the executioners and the prisoners of the Irish Revolution in 1919. And it goes right up until the Troubles in Ireland in the early 60s, in the early 70s, which is when I joined the Ancient Order Hibernians, because I saw the good work they did. Raising funds, sending funds over to Ireland. One of our ladies' Ancient Order Hibernian members, and a good friend of mine, Kathy Savage, she was awarded the Freedom Medal from the state AOH in New York. First woman to ever receive that in 50 years since its inception. She worked all year long and used to take the summers off. And she'd take her money, the money from the AOH, and she would go over and visit the families in the prison, the prisoners for the hunger strike, Bobby Sands and the rest of them. And that's how I got to meet her. But if it wasn't for great people like that, I never would have joined the Ancient Order Hibernians. But it is a great organization. They stand for what the Irish feel is right. And as we all know, we had the Good Friday Agreement back in the 80s, which now with Brexit and everything else that's going on over there is in jeopardy. And I swear that the British would like no more than to set up the fences, man the stations again, and go through what they went through in the 70s. So think about that. And if you want to be a voice for Ireland, try joining the Ancient Order Hibernians, and for the women out there, the ladies' Ancient Order Hibernians. And thank you very much for your time. Have a great day, and it's great to see a wonderful turnout. John?
At this time, I'd like to ask the Council General, Fionnuala Quinlan, to come on up.
Thank you so much, John. And hello, everybody. It's wonderful to be in the most Irish town in America today. I know it's getting slightly... I want to first thank all of you for coming out to commemorate the 1916 Rising. I know it's getting chillier by the moment, so I won't talk for too long. I, of course, want to thank all of the people gathered here on the podium for all of their work to put this event on and to really maintain the very deep and strong links that exist between Ireland and Scituate. So I suppose I just wanted to speak very briefly about the Irish-US relationship and acknowledge, of course, that no relationship is more enduring or more important to Ireland than our friendship with the United States. Our histories, of course, are deeply intertwined. Generations of Irish immigrants and their families contributed to making modern America, and in turn, Irish Americans have provided strong and sustained support for our efforts to achieve our place as a small, independent nation, and also, of course, for our peace process. Today we gather to remember the day 103 years ago that Pádraig Pearse read the Proclamation of Independence outside the General Post Office in Dublin. And in doing so, he and his fellow volunteers set in train the events that would lead to a free and independent Ireland. As Paul, the president of the AOH, has said, Easter 19 saw a small band of Irish men and women hold the centre of Dublin for almost a week against the might of the British Army. And though they were defeated, they changed the course of Irish history. And no country, of course, played a more important role in Ireland's search for independence than the United States. The men and women who signed that, or the men rather who signed the proclamation, but there was plenty of women involved in the rising as well, I'd like to say, and those men and women were deeply influenced by the United States. 5 of the 7 signatories had spent significant amount of time here in the States, and of course they had been deeply influenced by your own revolution of 1776. So the United States is actually the only country that's mentioned in the proclamation, which talks about the support of our exiled children in America. So this year is also an important one in that it marks 100 years since the foundation of the Dáil, and that's the Irish Parliament, and that took place in 1919. And on a day in January 100 years ago, the politicians gathered and they adopted 3 foundational texts that set out basically the basis for our nation. And again, America was central to their thinking. So they spoke about Ireland being the gateway to the Atlantic, the last outpost of Europe towards the West. So again, facing very much towards America and seeking America's support and solidarity on what would become a long and difficult journey to independence. The US and Ireland, I've said, have a really unique relationship. That's people-to-people ties, cultural, and also economic. 250,000 people are employed as a result of our deep economic ties on both sides of the Atlantic. And the government in this 100th year since the first Dáil was founded is looking to increase and further deepen our relationships with America. And that is not only through establishing more consulates and missions, such as the one in Boston, we're opening up in LA and looking to Miami and various other places, but also again in seeking US support, which has been so important for our peace process. So some of you may know there was a congressional delegation led by Speaker Pelosi in Dublin very recently, and they lent such important support to Ireland in terms of Brexit. And again, American support for Ireland at this very difficult time, as the President mentioned, at a time when the Good Friday Agreement is again really in jeopardy, the support of America has been critical. Some of you may know that a 29-year-old journalist was killed in Derry in the last 2 weeks. Her name was Lyra McKee. And that was a really deeply tragic event. She was just standing next to a police armoured vehicle, I guess, at a time when there were riots taking place. And a gunman opened fire indiscriminately, killing this 29-year-old woman who herself was deeply, deeply committed to the peace process. So there was such an outpouring of disgust and sadness and outrage about that I think what the good that has come out of it is it has spurred the politicians now again to open discussions to try to get the government in Northern Ireland back up and running. That's been suspended for 2 years. And again, of course, the support of the US and the support of Speaker Pelosi and the delegation, including, I should say, Congressman Richie Neal from Massachusetts, was absolutely critical. So I just want to end by really reiterating again how important the support of America has been from 1916 to the current moment. I think that's evidenced again today by the number of you who've come out of this chilly weather. So I am going to pass over to the next person. I believe it's Representative Machino who's going to come after me, and I want to thank you all very much for your attention and for being here today.
Thank you so much, General Counsel, for your wonderful words and for honoring the relationship. It's always delightful to be here in Scituate, in the warmth of the Irish people, even for those of us who are included that are only half Irish. I do appreciate that you include me every year, but I thought your words were very well taken. It strikes me that as we stand here, that we need to pause and take the moment to reflect on our history, or we will take for granted the things that our foremothers and forefathers fought for and cared for, and the passion for their culture and their spirit and their community. And we can't ever take those things for granted, and I think they are particularly imperiled at this time. And so it is wonderful, and I applaud the Hibernians and John for always marking this moment in history and gathering us here together so that we can celebrate both our heritage and our pride, as well as our community here in Scituate and the relationships and ties that bind us. It is very chilly, so I will just note that it is wonderful to see so many people here today, even though it is chilly, and that you've brought young people with us. We do not understand our future, and we cannot take ownership of our future unless we understand our past. And so to those of you who have brought your young people with you, thank you again. And I believe I will be turning it over now to my colleague on the Senate side, Senator Patrick O'Connor. Please welcome him.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. It's an honor for me to be here today. I apologize for my dressed down appearance. I actually have to leave here to throw out the first pitch at Weymouth Little League today, so I'm getting double duty. But I wanted to be here. This is the fourth time that I've been here. I've been here for each one of the Easter Rising ceremonies that we have, and I think it's incredibly important. Having spent 3 years of my life over in Europe and having the great privilege and opportunity to talk to so many people whose families were involved in, not only the Rising, but then also the revolution to come from there and the building up of the great Irish economy that we have, and as well as the relationship that we have with the United States of America. You see a lot of that same spirit, especially here in Scituate and on the South Shore, when you talk about the certain events that we have leading up to the great Scituate Irish St. Patrick's Day Parade, where I see Ed Kelly in the crowd who runs that, which I think is the best St. Patrick's Day Parade in the entire country. And also the small group of individuals who led that rising, when you see the duty that they had to preserve dignity and respect. You see that all throughout the South Shore and all throughout the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. You see it in people who answer our nation's call to serve and protect our country. You see it in those who have decided to stay home and protect us here with police officers and firefighters. And you see it with all of you being able to come out here today and to really reflect on what's happened in our past and to make sure that we continue to put at the forefront the dignity of everybody and the respect of everybody. And this here is a great crowd. This is definitely the biggest crowd we've had, and hopefully will continue to grow. I want to thank the Hibernians, thank John for putting this on, and thank all of you for being here today. I really appreciate it. And I'm going to pass this over to Brenda O'Connor, the chair of the Scituate West Cork Project, which is another great example.
Do it. That's as close as I can get to. That's one. We only have one lesson in Irish so far, so that's my complete vocabulary. I'm sorry to say. You may wonder why our town on the South Shore would care about what happened 103 years ago, 2,997 miles away. And you may rightfully ask that. But for many reasons, one of which, as the Consul General mentioned, the 2010, the most recent United States Census, marked 47.5% of Scituate residents as being of Irish birth or heritage. And we claim that, and we do so as proud Americans, acknowledging our cultural, social history and shared traditions with Ireland. And certainly being so heavily Irish, it is worth recognizing a pivotal event in world history. The Americans were the first colony to rise up and gain the freedom from England. Ireland was England's first colony, and in the 20th century was the first to rise up, followed by India, Asia, and African countries, colonies. So it was the blow that set the sun on the British Empire. As Nancy Pelosi mentioned when she was in Ireland, the Irish are the green thread through the fabric that is America. And we can certainly say that is true of Scituate. And I'm also thrilled to say that in 4 days, the Northern Ireland Treaty, Good Friday Treaty talks are beginning again. And let's all hope for the best with that. Thank you. And now our other representative, Patrick Kearney.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everybody. It's my pleasure to be here today to commemorate a significant event as the Easter Rising, an event which, in its many tragedies and courageous acts, forged a future of freedom known by some as the Rolling Rising for the country of Ireland. And I would say instilled in the hearts of so many the rising dreams of opportunity, democracy, and learning awaiting for them across the Atlantic in this nation. Today, the Irish Riviera of Scituate is a testimony to the hard work, ingenuity, and family values of the fishermen, moss gatherers, shipbuilders, industrialists, teachers, and pastors. I'm joined here today by my aunt, Elizabeth McCurtain Kearney, whose grandfather and his brother mobilized the people of Cork to fight for the independence of Ireland. Commemorating the event in Scituate, as others before mentioned, the most densely populated Irish town in the United States, serves as a reminder of that courage, bravery, and belief in a dream that can bring about meaningful change. Quite frequently, we hear about the visions of the American dream, and today I reflect upon those visions of the Irish, not only as dreams, but as a reminder that those dreams stemmed from a need to survive. We're here as neighbors, friends, and engaged citizens to be inspired by the courage of those we commemorate today. And as we address the issues of brown water, increased need for senior services, housing, and education, we're inspired to do what's right in the face of all our modern-day challenges. Although sometimes standing up and doing what is right is not always popular, and in the case of Thomas McCurtain, fatal, we know from the hard-won victories of those before us that change comes at the expense of some for the greater good of all. We shall continue to pay tribute to their sacrifice and remember everyone in our minds and in our hearts. Thank you all for being here today.
Good afternoon. Before I read the proclamation, I want to take the opportunity to acknowledge John Danahy and the constancy of John's wish to have this event honored by our town. And John has been a tremendous supporter from day one, and this would not be happening without all of the help that he has done, both that you can see and a lot that you cannot see. So, John Danahy. The proclamation was written a few days before the Easter Rising, and it's an interesting composite of different thoughts. The thinking is, obviously, Pádraig Pearse was one of the key drafters of this, but so was James Connolly and Thomas Clark. And when the proclamation was prepared, it was Tom Clark who was given the honor of signing it. Tom Clark spent 15 years in British prison, much of it enduring hard labor and under horrific conditions. He then went to America, where he married, and then came back to Ireland to help start the Easter Rising. And on Easter Monday, April 24th, 1916, the men and women left Union Hall, went to the General Post Office, where they took that over, and then at about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, on the steps of the GPO, Pádraig Pearse read the following. Public Nahéireann, the provisional government of the Irish Republic to the people of Ireland. Irish men and Irish women, in the name of God and of the dead generations from which she receives her old tradition of nationhood, Ireland, through us, summons her children to her flag and strikes for her freedom. Having organized and trained her manhood through her secret revolutionary organization, the Irish Republican Brotherhood, and through her open military organization, the Irish Volunteers and the Irish Citizen Army, having patiently perfected her discipline, having resolutely waited for the right moment to reveal itself, she now seizes that moment and, supported by her exiled children in America and by her gallant allies in Europe, but relying in the first on her own strength, she strikes in full confidence of victory. We declare the right of the people of Ireland to the ownership of Ireland and to the unfettered control of Irish destinies to be sovereign and indefeasible. The long usurpation of that right by a foreign people and government has not extinguished that right, nor can it ever be extinguished, except by the destruction of the Irish people. In every generation, the Irish people have asserted their right to national freedom and sovereignty. 6 times during the past 300 years, they have asserted it in arms. Standing on that fundamental right and again asserting it in arms in the face of the world, we hereby proclaim the Irish Republic as a sovereign, independent state, and we pledge our lives and the lives of our comrades in arms to the cause of its freedom, of its welfare, and of its exaltation among the nations. The Irish Republic is entitled to, and hereby claims, the allegiance of every Irish man and Irish woman. The Republic guarantees religious and civil liberty, equal rights, and equal opportunities to all its citizens, and declares its resolve to pursue the happiness and prosperity of the whole nation and of all its parts, cherishing all of the children of the nation equally and oblivious of the differences carefully fostered by an alien government which has divided a minority from the majority in the past. Until our arms have brought the opportune moment for the establishment of a permanent national government, representative of the whole people of Ireland and elected by the suffrages of all her men and women, the provisional government, hereby constituted, will administer the civil and military affairs of the Republic in trust for the people. We place the cause of the Irish Republic under the protection of the Most High God, whose blessing we invoke upon our arms, and we pray that no one who serves that cause will dishonor it by cowardice, inhumanity, or rapine. In this supreme hour, the Irish nation must, by its valor and discipline, and by the readiness of its children to sacrifice themselves for the common good, prove itself worthy of the august destiny to which it is called. Signed on behalf of the Provisional Government, Thomas J. Clark, Sean McDermott, P.H. Pierce, James Connolly, Thomas McDonough, Eamon Kent, Joseph Plunkett. I'll turn the podium over to Dr. Catherine Shannon.
Thank you very much, John, and thank you all for coming out today. It's great to see the state representatives, the local representatives, our Consul General here to come out to mark this very, very important anniversary of a defining moment in modern Irish history. In many respects, the Easter Rising was the equivalent of what the Boston Tea Party was in waking up the consciousness of the nation and setting out their claims to have rights of self-government, self-determination, and a democratic system. And I particularly want to thank as well Brenda O'Connor and her colleagues for what they are doing to keep the links between Scituate and Ireland very, very close. They've done a wonderful job in the few years that the Scituate West Cork cooperative link has been established. Now, The program today and many of the comments of the speakers previously have touched on some of the themes that I'm going to comment on, and I hope you won't find it too repetitive. I hope you'll find it perhaps a little bit enlightening or extend some information a little bit further. I want to start with a few observations about how the Easter Rising was commemorated at other significant anniversaries, and to let you know that commemorations such as that of 1916 can often be very complex and problematic events that are influenced as much by contemporary events and concerns as they are about remembering the specifics of the past. 2 years ago at this event, I described how the 50th and the 75th anniversary of 1916 were shaped by the Irish government's desire in 1966 to highlight Ireland's economic achievements and her highly respected international status as a peacekeeper throughout the globe. In 1991, the Irish government showed a certain reluctance to have the military parades and ceremonies that had marked the 50th anniversary, for fear that they might lend legitimacy to the violent campaign that the Provisional IRA was waging in Northern Ireland, a campaign that by then had taken the lives of over 2,500 people, most of them innocent civilians. Nonetheless, in that year of 1991, a survey revealed that 66% of the Republic's population took great pride in the Rising, as they should, while the same percentage, the same numbers, believed that the men of 1916 would have disapproved of the Provisional IRA campaign, a view that was reflected in the small 2% vote that Sinn Féin, their political arm, received in the Doyle elections of that year. And as the Consul General has noted, over the past week, we had the tragic death of the young journalist Lara McKee, one of the children of the Good Friday Agreement, as it were. She was only about 8 years old when that agreement was signed. Her death at the hands of the new IRA is an indication of how complicated it often is to acknowledge the courage and the integrity of those involved in 1916 and in the subsequent War of Irish Independence, while simultaneously the new IRA has shown no regard for the overwhelming democratic support of the Good Friday Agreement by voters in Ireland, both in the North and in the Republic. The new IRA's disregard for the lives of Irish citizens is totally at odds with Pádraig Pearse's decision to surrender unconditionally to prevent the further slaughter of the civilian population and his brave followers, as John's quote from Pearse's letter indicates. We must not allow the new IRA to hijack the lofty ideals and the legacy of the Easter Proclamation that John Sullivan has just read, or the principles of self-determination and democracy. Now, 3 years ago, the centenary celebrations in remembrance of the Easter Rising were very different from those of 1991 and 1966. In 2016, there was a deliberate effort to make those celebrations inclusive and non-elitist in nature. There was a new recognition of the wider European context during which the Rising took place, the ongoing First World War. Thus, among those recognized in 2016 were the 250,000 Irish men who served in the British Army units, either out of economic necessity, and certainly this was the case of many, particularly people from Dublin and Belfast who served, but also because there were others who believed that their Irish national identity was not incompatible with the stated war aim of defending Belgium as a small nation, just as Ireland was a small nation. Some of those people died, including there were 10,000 actually whose lives were lost, 10,000 Irishmen whose lives were lost. Included among those were Lieutenant Robert Gregory, the son of Lady Gregory, the founder of the Abbey Theatre, an institution that I'm sure most of you will recognize as a very, very important cultural institution in Ireland. There was also Thomas Kettle, an MP in the Irish Parliamentary Party, who was a professor at UCD and quite an accomplished economist. There was Francis Ledwith, a member of the Gaelic League and a very popular poet. And there was, of course, the brother of the leader of the Irish Parliamentary Party, Willie Redmond. His brother John was the leader of the party. Willie Redmond, even though he was over 50 years old, enlisted in the army. And he said one of the reasons that he enlisted was his belief that the shared experience of the nationalist and unionist soldiers in the trenches might help to overcome their political differences between nationalists and unionists, between Catholics and Protestants, and build a bridge between the North and the South and eliminate the possibilities of a petition. Sadly, Redmond was too optimistic on this point, and the Easter Rising only served to reinforce unionist opposition to Home Rule and increase the likelihood of some form of petition once the Home Rule Act that had been passed in 1914 was actually enacted. Now, another aspect of the commemorations in 2016 was the remembrance of the 256 Dublin citizens, including 40 innocent children who were killed as a result of the military activities in Easter week. Equally important was the recognition of the deaths of 132 members of the Dublin Metropolitan Police and Crown Forces who were killed performing what they considered, by the light of their conscience, their duty. Another interesting aspect of the 2016 remembrances and commemoration was a recognition, finally, of the crucial role of women in the Irish Citizens Army and the Cumann Ban, the roles that they played as nurses, as cooks, messengers, and ammunition managers. And as a matter of fact, some of you are probably familiar with the famous photograph of Pádraig Pearse and the British commander accepting the surrender. The original photograph had Elizabeth O'Farrell standing beside him. She was the lady who brought the messages back and forth between the British and the rebels in the GPO and in Moore Street, and took the surrender message around to other parts of the city. But she had been brushed out of history. They actually brushed her out of the photograph, and the original was found and then restored, which I think was a great improvement. 189 women actually participated in the Easter Rising, 77 of whom were arrested and imprisoned. And when I saw the program today, I opened it up, and there on the centerfold were all these brave women. It's about time that we got onto the centerfold. Another very important aspect, of course, was in 2016 the recognition of the importance of Irish American support, not just in 1916, but also over the generations for the cause of economic justice and political liberty in Ireland. Efforts that went back to the land wars, which eventually led to land reform and enabled people to transfer from being tenants to becoming owners of their property. That was very, very important. But many of the leaders of the Rising, of course, had some experience in America, and it was defining for them. Pierce had a visit, James Conley, and others. So the American values in informing the vision and the goals of these brave men of 1916 was very, very important. Now, in evaluating the political impact of the Rising and its immediate aftermath, that raises a lot of issues at the time and since. And as we've heard, the ideals that motivated the leaders were noble and extremely patriotic. But their decision to proceed on Easter Monday, despite the known loss of of the expected German guns and ammunition, with the sinking of the Odd, and in defiance of the orders of their military commander, Owen McNeill, was seen even then as misguided by no less a patriot than John Dillon of the Irish Parliamentary Party. At the same time, Dillon admired their courage and their bravery in bringing this fight out on principle and in the open, and then having the wisdom to stop when the price for civilian lives was too high. Dillon said they fought a brave and a clean fight. Now, although the popularity of the Irish Parliamentary Party had slipped a little bit in the few years before the Rising, it has to be recalled that that party secured the Home Rule Bill as an act of Parliament in 1914. Had the First World War not happened, then it's likely that Ireland would have made the transition to self-government, not complete independence, but self-government and maybe eventually complete independence without recourse to military violence. But we can't change the facts of history. There were a lot of factors that complicated the conferring of actual home rule at that time. But it should be noted that at the time of the Rising, in Easter week, historians have judged that perhaps only about 1/3 of the voters of Dublin, the citizens, were sympathetic to the rebels initially. Throughout the rest of the country, there was a great deal of confusion and bemusement over the event and what its actual purposes were. One young man who later fought as a volunteer in the War of Independence recalled, and I quote, "The Rising appeared to me to be tragically insane. After a severe examination of conscience, I did not feel myself bound to participate and had no inclination to do so. At the same time, I felt like a deserter and was miserably unhappy. During the course of the week, however, wonder at their insanity gave way to admiration for their courage and pride in the fight they made. Then came anxiety and apprehension as to their fate, and eventually grief and futile indignation at the brutal executions," unquote. As this quotation shows, the hostility and indifferent responses to the Rising would eventually give way to admiration and support for the Easter rebels, largely as a result of the brutal and long drawn-out summary executions of the 7 signatories of the proclamation and 9 others ordered by the British military commander, John Maxwell. John Dillon, who I mentioned earlier, succinctly captured the impact of the ongoing executions on the Irish nationalist constitutional tradition, which he had worked so hard for 40 years, when he told the British government in the House of Commons, his very last appearance in the House of Commons, quote, "You are washing out our whole life work in a sea of blood," unquote. The internment of hundreds more men and women than were actually involved in the rising further alienated the population. The collapse of the British-led June 1916 negotiations to immediately implement Home Rule, along with the exclusion of the 6 Ulster counties, further compromised John Redmond's position and the Irish Parliamentary Party's standing, and created the opportunity for the Sinn Féin party, which had not participated in the rising, to win the 2 crucial by-elections in 1917. Count Plunkett, whose son was among the executed rising leaders, won the Roscommon election in February, while Eamon de Valera, a veteran of Easter Week who had been the commander at Boland's Mill, and was now an official in both the Volunteers and the Sinn Féin, won the Clare election in August of 1917. The British decision in early 1918 to extend conscription to Ireland met with broad, cross-party civilian and clerical resistance, thereby setting the stage for Sinn Féin's triumph in the December 1918 general election. The conscription campaign, anti-conscription campaign, perhaps more than anything, galvanized widespread support for action eventually in the War of Independence. Sinn Féin, now closely allied with the Republican Volunteers, won 73 seats in December 1918. Redmond's party only 6. The Unionists had 26, most of them from Ulster. And as others have noted this morning, on the 21st of January 1919, in Dublin's Mansion House, 27 of the 73 elected Sinn Féin delegates convened their own parliament, known as Dáil Éireann. They issued a Declaration of Independence, which affirmed their allegiance to the Irish Republic, proclaimed in 1916, and asked for the world to recognize Ireland's status as a self-governing nation and to recognize their sovereignty and the legitimacy of the claim to this as a result of the voting that took place in December. The document reiterated commitments to justice, equality, and opportunity for all citizens that had featured in the Easter Proclamation, which you heard read earlier. And also, it indicated a determination to secure the evacuation of all British officials and forces. And here is an important point. They hoped that that could be done peacefully, but were ready, if that wasn't possible, to do it by force. The Dáil also announced its democratic program, which was an ambitious and lofty statement of the values and principles that would inform their governing policies. There was a socialist ring in the claim that private property rights would be subordinate to the public right and welfare, and that government should oversee the development of the country's natural resources and the development of mutually beneficial foreign trade so that all of the populace would benefit, not just a small number of the population. In fact, the socialist ideas, inspired by Connolly and the Irish Labour Party in this document, found few supporters when the new Irish state was created in 1922, and for 4 decades after that, state policies were economically and socially very conservative and reflective of the property interests of the strong farming class and the business sector. Significantly, the Democratic program stated that the government had a primary duty to provide for, and I quote, the physical, mental, and spiritual well-being of children, and to ensure that they had adequate food, clothing, and shelter, and proper education and training to become citizens of a free and a Gaelic Ireland. A similar commitment was made to provide appropriate care for the nation's elderly and infirm. 100 years later, it is perhaps well to reflect on the extent to which the principles and commitments outlined in the Easter Proclamation and in the Doyle pronouncements of January 1919 have been achieved, especially in the light of recent reports that close to 4,000 Irish children are homeless and 220,000 others are living in poverty. There is also a mounting crisis in health services that impacts older people and the less well-off severely. Expanded educational opportunities are needed to address persistent poverty and growing income equality. Indeed, some wonder if the priorities of the multinational companies and the deference shown to them by Irish governments in tax breaks and incentives has created a new kind of colonialism, as damaging to a large portion of the population as was the British colonialism that 1916 and the War of Independence sought to end. Now, this, of course, is not to deny the tremendous gains that the Republic has made in the past 40 years to bring prosperity and a better life to a large portion of the people. But there is still much to be done. And if people stay loyal to the promises that were made in 1916 and 1919, that can happen, so that those left behind will be brought up to lives that reflect their human dignity and human values. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't mention also that this is a centenary of one of the first events in the War of Independence that began in 1919, and that was the activity at Soulhead Bay in County Tipperary, where 2 RIC policemen who were attempting to capture a cartload of gelatinite in case they might need it down the line. And in this particular episode, led by Dan Breen of the Tipperary Brigade, and two other very important volunteers at the time, the attack resulted in the killing of 2 policemen, both Catholics. This is an interesting event, again, to look back on. It shows the complications of commemoration. In fact, it was a freelance operation and did not have the authorization from the Doyle. However, we have in our midst today the niece of a participant in that affair, Margaret Stapleton. I see you over there, and you might want to have a comment afterwards about this. But it was an event that in some ways is totally understandable in terms of what the volunteers in Tipperary felt was facing them. But the event itself, in the immediate time, cast something of a shadow over the fact that on the same day was the meeting of a freely elected parliament in Dublin. Now, finally, and it's getting cold, so I'm going to finish. You can all go have a little ishkabah afterwards. Hot ishkabah will help you. Whiskey. Finally, in creating the conditions that would realize the 1916 vision of a united Ireland, in which Irish men and women of all religions and political backgrounds can live in peace and equality and with justice, this continues to be a work in progress. The potential threat of Brexit that poses to the hard-won achievement of the Good Friday Agreement and to the gains in reconciliation between the two northern communities, between Dublin and London, and between Dublin and Belfast, must be recognized and addressed with creativity, with dialogue, and with diplomacy. In that way, Ireland will move closer to the democratic, egalitarian, and pluralistic vision of an agreed Ireland that would make the men of Easter 1916 proud and happy that their sacrifice was not in vain. Thank you very much. Now, Robert Mullis is going to sing the national anthem.
Bobby? And then afterwards, ladies and gentlemen, feel free to go over to the galley for some refreshments. Thank you.
Sheena Fina fall to Fegalegaran Bwil Dasno a tongue around in Kyun Favoid Fatsi Shin Shin Shafasta Ni Fog Fa Puntiran off Puntra Anaka him Sabanwell Laganer Gale Convoys no sail Lagani Screak Pilavak na belet Cunning around the beam. Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight on the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bomb bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave.